What if I told you that 5,000 years ago there was a city so massive, so advanced, that it would take another 4,000 years for any city to match its size? A city with tens of thousands of people, towering temples that touched the sky, and innovations that would change the world forever. This wasn't a myth, this was Uruk, the world's first true city. But here's what will shock you. Uruk wasn't alone. Across the Mesopotamian plain, cities were rising from the earth like never before. Eridu, the oldest city on earth. Ur, the city of kings. These weren't just large villages, they were something completely new in human history. In the next 28 minutes, you'll walk the streets of these first cities. You'll see how they transformed from simple settlements into complex urban centers with governments, economies, and cultures that would influence the world for millennia. You'll discover the innovations that made cities possible, from revolutionary architecture to new forms of social organization. But most importantly, you'll understand how these first cities created a template that every civilization since has followed. This is the story of the urban revolution, the moment when humans learned to live together in ways that had never been imagined. Stay with us, because what you're about to see will change how you think about cities forever. Around 4000 BC, something unprecedented happened in southern Mesopotamia. For the first time in human history, settlements began to grow beyond anything that had existed before. What had been villages of a few hundred or even a few thousand people began to transform into something entirely new: cities. The largest and most important of these early cities was Uruk. Located in what is now southern Iraq, Uruk would become the world's first true urban center. At its peak, around 2900 BC, Uruk may have had a population of 50,000 to 80,000 people, an astonishing number for the ancient world. To put this in perspective, most settlements at this time had populations in the hundreds or low thousands. Uruk was an order of magnitude larger. But size alone doesn't make a city. What made Uruk truly revolutionary was its complexity. It wasn't just a large village, it was a fundamentally different form of human organization. Uruk had specialized districts for different activities. It had monumental architecture that served the entire community. It had complex social hierarchies. It had systems of government and administration. It had an economy based on trade and craft specialization. It coordinated the activities of surrounding agricultural areas. Uruk was the prototype for everything that would follow. It demonstrated that humans could live together in dense concentrations, organize complex activities, and create a way of life that was more than the sum of its parts. The story of Uruk is the story of the birth of urban civilization itself. The emergence of Uruk marked the beginning of what archaeologists call the Uruk period, which lasted from approximately 4000 to 3100 BC. This period represents one of the most dramatic transformations in human history. During the Uruk period, settlements across southern Mesopotamia began to grow rapidly. The population of the region increased dramatically, and people began to concentrate in larger and larger settlements. Uruk itself grew from a town of perhaps 5,000 people, around 4000 BC, to a city of tens of thousands by 3000 BC. This growth wasn't accidental. It was driven by several key factors. First, agricultural productivity had increased significantly. Improved irrigation systems, better crop varieties, and more efficient farming techniques meant that farmers could produce more food than ever before. This agricultural surplus could support larger non-farming populations: craftspeople, traders, administrators, priests, and rulers. Second, the social and organizational systems that had developed during the Ubaid period were now sophisticated enough to manage large, complex communities. Leadership structures, economic systems, and methods of coordination had evolved to the point where they could support urban life. Third, new technologies and innovations made cities possible. Advances in construction, pottery, metalworking, and other crafts created new possibilities for urban life. Most importantly, the period saw the development of new forms of economic organization that could support dense populations. The Uruk period was the moment when all the elements that had been developing for thousands of years came together to create something entirely new, the urban revolution. While Uruk would become the largest and most powerful of the early Sumerian cities, it was not the oldest. That distinction belongs to Eridu, a city that the Sumerians themselves believed was the first city ever created. According to Sumerian mythology, Eridu was founded by the god Enki, the god of water, wisdom, and creation. The city was said to have been built before the Great Flood, making it the most ancient of all cities. Archaeological evidence supports this claim. Eridu shows evidence of continuous occupation from around 5400 BC, making it one of the oldest continuously inhabited sites in the world. By 4000 BC, Eridu was already a significant settlement with a large temple complex. The Temple of Eridu, dedicated to Enki, was built and rebuilt many times over the centuries, each new version larger and more elaborate than the last. The final version, built around 2100 BC, was a massive ziggurat that dominated the landscape. But Eridu's importance went beyond its age. The city was a major religious center, and its temple was one of the most important in all of Sumer. Eridu was also strategically located near the Persian Gulf, making it an important center for trade. The city's location at the edge of the marshes, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers met the sea, gave it access to both river and maritime trade routes. Eridu represents the continuity of Sumerian civilization, a city that existed from the earliest days of settled life through the height of Sumerian power and beyond. It was a living link to the past, a reminder of the deep roots of urban civilization. What made cities possible? This is one of the most important questions in human history. Cities require several essential conditions, and by 4000 BC, all of these conditions had been met in southern Mesopotamia. First, cities need a reliable food surplus. People who live in cities don't grow their own food. They depend on farmers in surrounding areas. This requires agricultural productivity high enough that farmers can produce more food than they need for themselves. The irrigation systems and agricultural techniques that had developed over the previous millennia made this possible. Second, cities need effective transportation and communication. People, goods, and information need to be able to move efficiently. The rivers of Mesopotamia provided natural transportation routes, and the flat terrain made overland travel relatively easy. Third, cities need social organization capable of managing complex activities. Large populations require systems for maintaining order, resolving disputes, coordinating activities, and making decisions. The leadership structures and administrative systems that had developed during the Ubaid period provided this foundation. Fourth, cities need economic systems that can support specialization and trade. Not everyone in a city can be a farmer. Cities require craftspeople, traders, administrators, and other specialists. This requires systems for exchanging goods and services. Finally, cities need a reason to exist, some function that makes it worthwhile for people to live in dense concentrations rather than spread out across the landscape. In Sumer, this function was provided by temples, which served as religious, economic, and administrative centers, and by the need for defense and coordination in an increasingly competitive environment. All of these conditions came together in southern Mesopotamia around 4000 BC, creating the perfect environment for the birth of cities. The Uruk period, beginning around 4000 BC, marked a fundamental shift in human society. This was not just a continuation of previous trends, it was a qualitative leap into something entirely new. During this period, the pace of change accelerated dramatically. Settlements that had taken centuries to grow from hundreds to thousands of people now grew from thousands to tens of thousands in just a few generations. New technologies appeared rapidly. Pottery became more sophisticated and standardized. Metalworking advanced, with copper being used for tools and weapons. Construction techniques improved, allowing for larger and more complex buildings. But the most significant changes were social and organizational. The scale of coordination required for urban life demanded new forms of leadership and administration. Temple complexes grew larger and more elaborate, serving as centers of economic activity as well as religious worship. Trade networks expanded dramatically, connecting Sumerian cities with distant regions. Specialization increased, with people devoting themselves entirely to specific crafts or professions. Social stratification became more pronounced, with clear distinctions between different classes of people. The Uruk period also saw the development of new forms of artistic expression, with distinctive styles of sculpture, seal carving, and architecture that would characterize Sumerian culture. Most importantly, this period saw the first steps toward the invention of writing, as the need to record transactions, manage resources, and communicate across distances became increasingly urgent. The Uruk period was the crucible in which urban civilization was forged. It was a time of rapid innovation, dramatic growth, and fundamental transformation. By the end of this period, around 3100 BC, Sumerian cities were fully established, and the world's first civilization was in full flower. The most visible symbol of Sumerian cities was the ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid that dominated the urban landscape. These were not just buildings, they were statements of power, faith, and human achievement. The ziggurat was a temple platform, a raised structure on which a temple was built. The earliest ziggurats were relatively simple, raised platforms a few meters high, but over time they grew larger and more elaborate. By 3000 BC, the Great Ziggurat of Uruk stood over 12 meters high, with a temple on top that could be seen from miles away. Later ziggurats would be even larger. The Ziggurat of built around 2100 BC, was a massive structure with 3 levels, each smaller than the one below, creating a stepped pyramid effect. The construction of a ziggurat required enormous resources and coordinated labor. Thousands of workers had to be organized to dig foundations, make bricks, transport materials, and build the structure itself. The bricks were made from mud mixed with straw, then dried in the sun. Millions of bricks were needed for a single ziggurat. The structure was built in layers, with each layer carefully planned and executed. The ziggurat served multiple functions. It was a religious center, with the temple on top, serving as the dwelling place of the city's patron god. It was a symbol of the city's power and importance. It was a focal point for community identity. And it was a demonstration of what humans could achieve when they worked together. The ziggurat was architecture on a scale never before attempted, and it would influence building styles for thousands of years. Sumerian cities were not egalitarian places. They had complex social hierarchies with clear distinctions between different classes of people. At the top were the rulers and high priests, who held both political and religious authority. These elites controlled the temple complexes, managed the city's resources, and made decisions that affected everyone. They lived in larger, more elaborate houses, had access to better food and goods, and were buried with valuable grave goods. Below them were the administrators, scribes, and other temple officials who managed the day-to-day operations of the city. These were educated people who could read and write, keep records, and coordinate activities. They formed a middle class of sorts, with more privileges than ordinary people, but less than the rulers. Next came the craftspeople and merchants, specialists who produced goods or engaged in trade. These people had skills that were valued, and they could accumulate wealth through their work. They included potters, weavers, metalworkers, traders, and others who provided specialized goods and services. Below them were the farmers and laborers, who made up the majority of the population. These people worked the land, built the buildings, maintained the irrigation systems, and performed the manual labor that kept the city functioning. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were slaves, people who had been captured in war, sold into slavery, or born into servitude. This social stratification was not just about wealth, it was about power, status, and access to resources. It created a system where some people had much more than others, and where social mobility was limited. But it also created incentives for people to work within the system, to seek advancement, and to contribute to the city's success. One of the defining characteristics of urban life is the division of labor, the specialization of different people in different tasks. In Sumerian cities, this division was highly developed. Most people no longer produced everything they needed themselves. Instead, they specialized in particular activities and traded their products or services for other goods. Farmers focused on growing crops and raising animals. They produced the food that fed the city. Craftspeople specialized in particular crafts. Potters made pottery. Weavers made textiles. Metalworkers made tools and weapons. Carpenters built structures, and so on. Each craft required specific skills and knowledge that took time to develop. Traders specialized in moving goods from place to place, buying and selling, and managing commercial transactions. Administrators and scribes specialized in managing resources, keeping records, and coordinating activities. Priests specialized in religious rituals and temple management. This specialization increased productivity and quality. A specialist potter could make better pottery faster than someone who only made pots occasionally. A specialist metalworker could create more sophisticated tools and weapons. Specialization also allowed for innovation, as people who focused on particular crafts could develop new techniques and improve their products. But specialization also created interdependence. Potters needed food from farmers, tools from metalworkers, and markets from traders. Farmers needed tools, pottery, and other goods from craftspeople. Everyone needed the coordination provided by administrators. This interdependence required systems of exchange, trust, and cooperation. It required rules and norms that governed economic interactions. It required ways of resolving disputes. The division of labor in Sumerian cities created a complex economic system that was more productive and innovative than anything that had existed before. The temple was the economic heart of Sumerian cities. Temples controlled vast amounts of land, managed agricultural production, stored surplus grain, coordinated craft production, and managed trade. The temple economy was a command economy of sorts, where the temple directed economic activity and distributed resources. Temple lands were worked by farmers who gave a portion of their produce to the temple. The temple stored this surplus in large granaries, creating a buffer against famine and a resource for supporting non-farming activities. The temple also managed craft production. Temple workshops produced pottery, textiles, tools, and other goods. Temple craftspeople were supported by the temple's resources, allowing them to focus entirely on their crafts and produce high-quality goods. The temple managed trade, both local and long distance. Temple administrators coordinated the exchange of goods, managed trade routes, and accumulated valuable materials from distant regions. The temple economy allowed for large-scale coordination of economic activity. It could mobilize resources for major projects like building ziggurats or irrigation systems. It could support specialists who didn't produce food themselves. It could accumulate and redistribute wealth. But the temple economy also concentrated power in the hands of temple administrators and priests. They controlled access to resources and made decisions about their distribution. This economic power was closely linked to political and religious power, creating a system where the temple was the dominant institution in Sumerian society. The temple economy was one of the key innovations that made urban civilization possible, providing the economic foundation for the complex societies that emerged in Sumer. Craft specialization in Sumerian cities reached levels of sophistication that had never been seen before. Sumerian craftspeople produced goods of exceptional quality, using techniques that would be admired for thousands of years. Pottery was highly developed, with potters using the wheel to create uniform, well-made vessels. Sumerian pottery was often decorated with intricate designs and was traded widely. Textile production was advanced, with weavers creating fine fabrics from wool and flax. Sumerian textiles were valued throughout the ancient world. Metalworking was sophisticated, with craftspeople creating tools, weapons, and decorative objects from copper and later bronze. Sumerian metalworkers developed techniques for casting, forging, and working metal that were highly advanced for their time. Stoneworking was skilled, with craftspeople creating sculptures, seals, and other objects from various types of stone. Sumerian cylinder seals, small carved cylinders used to make impressions in clay, were works of art as well as practical tools. Jewelry making was refined, with craftspeople working gold, silver, and semi-precious stones to create beautiful ornaments. The quality of Sumerian crafts was so high that Sumerian goods were traded throughout the ancient world, from Egypt to the Indus Valley. This craft specialization was made possible by the urban environment, which provided large markets, access to materials, and the ability to support full-time specialists. It was also made possible by the temple economy, which could support craftspeople and provide them with resources and markets. The sophistication of Sumerian crafts was one of the hallmarks of their civilization and one of the reasons for its influence. Trade was essential to Sumerian cities. Mesopotamia lacked many raw materials that were needed for urban life. Stone for tools and construction, metals for tools and weapons, timber for building, semi-precious stones for decoration, all had to be imported. In exchange, Sumerian cities exported agricultural products, textiles, pottery, and manufactured goods. Sumerian trade networks extended far beyond their immediate region. Trade routes connected Sumerian cities with Anatolia, the Levant, the Persian Gulf, and even the Indus Valley. Traders traveled by river, by land, and by sea, carrying goods across vast distances. The rivers of Mesopotamia provided natural transportation routes. Boats could carry heavy goods along the Tigris and Euphrates, making trade efficient and relatively inexpensive. Overland routes connected Sumerian cities with regions to the north and east. Maritime routes through the Persian Gulf connected Sumer with the Arabian Peninsula, the Indus Valley, and beyond. Trade was managed and coordinated by temple administrators and wealthy merchants. Large-scale trade required organization, capital, and knowledge of distant markets and routes. Trade brought not just goods but also ideas, technologies, and cultural influences. Sumerian cities were connected to a wider world through trade, and this connection enriched their culture and accelerated innovation. Trade also created wealth, as cities that controlled trade routes or produced valuable goods could accumulate resources. The importance of trade to Sumerian cities is evident in the archaeological record, which shows goods from distant regions in Sumerian sites and Sumerian goods in sites far from Mesopotamia. Trade was one of the engines of Sumerian civilization, connecting cities to each other and to the wider world. The growth of Sumerian cities was explosive. Between 4000 and 3000 BC, the population of southern Mesopotamia increased dramatically. Uruk grew from a town of perhaps 5,000 people to a city of 50,000 or more. Other cities experienced similar growth. This population explosion was driven by several factors. Agricultural productivity had increased, allowing more people to be supported. Improved irrigation systems brought more land under cultivation. Better farming techniques increased yields. The ability to store and distribute food surpluses meant that cities could support large, non-farming populations. But population growth was also driven by migration. People moved from rural areas to cities, attracted by opportunities for work, trade, and a different way of life. Cities offered access to goods, services, and opportunities that weren't available in villages. They offered protection, as cities were easier to defend than scattered villages. They offered community and culture, as cities were centers of religious, social, and cultural activity. The population explosion in Sumerian cities created both opportunities and challenges. More people meant more labor, more skills, more innovation, and more economic activity. But it also meant greater pressure on resources, more complex social organization, and new problems to solve. The ability of Sumerian cities to manage this growth, to organize large populations, and to create systems that could support urban life was one of their greatest achievements. It demonstrated that humans could live together in dense concentrations and create societies that were more than the sum of their parts. Urban life brought new problems that had never been encountered before. Dense populations created challenges that required new solutions. Sanitation was a major issue. With thousands of people living close together, waste management became critical. Sumerian cities developed systems for disposing of waste, but these were often inadequate. Disease could spread rapidly in dense populations, and epidemics were a constant threat. Water supply was another challenge. Cities needed reliable sources of clean water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning. Sumerian cities were located near rivers, but bringing water into the city and distributing it required infrastructure. Food security was a concern. Cities depended on surrounding agricultural areas for food, and any disruption to food supply could be catastrophic. Famine was a real threat, especially if crops failed or trade was disrupted. Social tensions increased with larger populations. Disputes over resources, status, and power became more common. Maintaining order in large cities required new forms of law and enforcement. Defense became more complex. Larger, wealthier cities were attractive targets for raiders and rival cities. Cities needed walls, organized defense, and military forces. Resource management became more challenging. Coordinating the use of land, water, and other resources among large populations required sophisticated systems. These urban problems required new solutions, new technologies, new forms of organization, new systems of governance. The ability of Sumerian cities to address these challenges was crucial to their survival and success. Cities that could solve these problems thrived. Those that couldn't faced crisis and decline. By 3000 BC, Sumerian cities had achieved something unprecedented in human history. They had created a new form of human organization, the city, that would become the foundation of civilization for the next 5,000 years. Sumerian cities were not just large settlements. They were complex systems that integrated agriculture, craft production, trade, religion, government, and culture into cohesive wholes. They demonstrated that humans could live together in dense concentrations, organize complex activities, and create societies that were more productive, innovative, and culturally rich than anything that had existed before. The achievements of Sumerian cities were remarkable. They built monumental architecture on a scale never before attempted. They developed sophisticated economic systems that could support large populations and complex specialization. They created new forms of social organization that could manage the challenges of urban life. They established trade networks that connected distant regions. They developed technologies and crafts that were admired throughout the ancient world. Most importantly, they created a template for urban civilization that would be followed by every subsequent civilization. The city became the standard form of human organization for complex societies. Every major civilization since Sumer has been built around cities. The achievements of Sumerian cities were not just local, they influenced the entire ancient world. Sumerian goods, technologies, and ideas spread far beyond Mesopotamia. The model of the city that Sumerians created would be adopted and adapted by civilizations across the globe. Sumerian cities had proven that urban civilization was not just possible, it was a powerful engine for human achievement. The model of the city that Sumerians created spread far beyond Mesopotamia. As Sumerian trade networks expanded, so did Sumerian influence. Sumerian goods, technologies, and ideas traveled along trade routes to distant regions. Other cultures adopted and adapted Sumerian innovations. The concept of the city itself spread as other regions began to develop their own urban centers. In Egypt, cities emerged that showed Sumerian influence. In the Indus Valley, urban centers developed that may have been influenced by Sumerian models. In Anatolia and the Levant, cities grew that were connected to Sumerian trade networks. But Sumerian influence went beyond just the spread of cities. Sumerian technologies, especially in pottery, metalworking and construction, influenced crafts throughout the ancient world. Sumerian artistic styles and motifs appeared in distant regions. Sumerian ideas about government, religion, and social organization influenced other cultures. The Sumerian model of the city, with its temple, its specialized economy, its social hierarchy, and its role as a center of power and culture, became a template that other civilizations would follow. This influence was not one way. Sumerian cities also absorbed ideas, technologies, and cultural elements from other regions. Trade brought not just goods, but also knowledge and innovation. Sumerian civilization was part of a wider network of cultural exchange that enriched all participants. The spread of the Sumerian city model demonstrates the power of innovation and the importance of cultural exchange. It shows how a single breakthrough can influence the entire world, and how human achievement builds on the achievements of others. We have witnessed the birth of the world's first cities. From the emergence of Uruk and Eridu to the full flowering of urban civilization, we have seen how humans learned to live together in ways that had never been imagined. We have explored the innovations that made cities possible, from revolutionary architecture to complex economic systems. We have seen how cities transformed human society, creating new forms of organization, new technologies, and new ways of life. But the story of Sumerian civilization is far from complete. In our next episode, we will witness one of the most important inventions in human history, the invention of writing. This single innovation would mark the boundary between prehistory and history itself. It would allow humans to record their thoughts, their laws, their stories, and their knowledge for the first time. It would enable the management of complex economies and the coordination of large-scale activities. It would create the first literature, the first laws, and the first historical records. The invention of writing was the final piece that completed Sumerian civilization, transforming it from an advanced society into the world's first true civilization. Join us in episode 3 as we discover how humans learned to make marks in clay that would change the world forever. We've just explored one of the most transformative periods in human history, the birth of the world's first cities. From Uruk's massive ziggurat to Eridu's ancient temple, we've seen how humans created something entirely new, urban civilization. But this is only part of the story. In our next episode, we'll witness the invention that would change everything: writing. You'll see how Sumerian scribes developed cuneiform, the world's first writing system. You'll discover how this single innovation enabled the management of complex economies, the recording of laws, and the creation of the first literature. You'll read excerpts from the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's oldest surviving work of literature. You'll understand how writing marked the boundary between prehistory and history, allowing humans to record their knowledge and pass it down through generations. This is a story you absolutely cannot miss. If you've been fascinated by the rise of Sumerian cities, if you want to understand how humans learned to record their thoughts for the first time, then make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss episode 3. Your engagement means the world to us. Like this video if you want to see more about the empires that shook the world. Comment below and tell us, what amazed you most about the first cities? What are you most excited to learn about writing and cuneiform? And share this video with anyone who loves history and wants to understand how civilization truly began. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode, where we'll discover how marks in clay changed human history forever. Until then, remember, every great achievement starts with a single innovation. Sumerian cities were that innovation, and they changed the world forever.